So Ma so so ra re ye je che ye wa de so ya ve yo la ja hello de yo da ga de ga de pa ra ga de pa ra sa ma ga de mo de so yo de yo da ga de ga de pa ra ga de pa ra sa ma ga mo de so yo de yo da ga de ga de pa ra ga de pa ra sa ma ga mo de so yo ge re don da ya ju xie wa da me de de ve jia da zhe wa Kim ban zhe yin be dong zong yu nian da xi de jia ting de de le yu yang zai ji be yi yu ji me yang do da ri ra le ji ni de ni ba de sa ni ji do me de
Simje tamje ye to de to ja na ba yang da ba zo so ye ko mo ba ji ne to ba sha ti shi de ta be shi se nya gu lu sha ju su mo ji ma si se da ne se ba shi
Let me remind every one of us to take a moment and cultivate the highest form of motivation. We call it bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should all participate in this Lamrim teaching, teaching on the stages of path leading to complete enlightenment. To give you the blessing of oral transmission of this Lamrim text, allow me to read about a page or two from this text. In the English translation, it is the volume number 3.
Chedendir tijin pe te kono jiwatsu dongwa me no te na da dong de ge bazen ba se ba zo ni ve te ve te kono ni de me shi da da gyo ro shin ji me bra te la ba zo shi je da me de ro ba me te kono ni ji be lam tu me zo nyam de nyam na ju me da da ba de ge zo na ba ta ji de se ba la ni le me nyu mo la me je su ji be bang ba te bang ba ni me te me la yu me che dong na ge shi ji zhi be ce ma dong jie de ma me ba ba bi shu ji gu yin bi shi da la rong xin me ba to ba de ye ye la de ji be pong bo na la rang xin ban zhen bo da ba ji shi de xin da se ne mo ko lo la wa so ba de ye la na mo ja se ba shi no ba de se ze li be de na da ba ma ri bi shi ji lo dong de ne da ba ma ri ba shi lo ji lo da de ma nam da de ngo ba shi be shi jo pong bo ngo ba da ge ni wa li ba ni de na di ji pong bu zi ni yue ba xie gong de pong zi ni ba xie xie na ta jie ta ba de ba na ye na ba jie ba ye na wa na ba de de jie ba na ta ba de na ji ma me ba ti xie de te na la da ni ye ba ma yi na da ge ye ba ka la ji da ma mi be xie da de da be xie da ge ge wo yong xian de be xie me ba mi ji ru che de xing da zi na ti ye la jiang ce ba ce bi ma mi be ti ge ne zhe ba da ge kang ge se da me ba da ba ni ji be se bu bu ngo bo da ge da go ya da me ba da ba ji ru xi da la ra ji me ba da bi shi ce da pu bo da de ran xi me ba da ba song zong ju le苏老说别让我了没别心就了的觉得别现在刚啥给大没把它多吧样啊民觉得的大的大为些不了没别些这个的现在不这个这个这这不让人没把它马到那看啥给大没把它不是不觉得我给这个看啥了人没把它别老天就不人没把它吧因了特别了，你这这个对教育教育到小的还是你说是了，也别听你让心，不特别了，你就说是我也得别弄，不过这个没啥不特别了些，那看啥那些不特别了听你教，不过那些没不到那，看啥他们特别这不那些不到不现在这样那吃我他不可开没得别吃我没些不少。考察等人是没有到别老的，也不过也没到娘对民生讲老的先了，对没对？不过也没有你是真的别那我不过心，这上心找到别中到我这不是那把人我提起来看啥？要是因为我到别这不过也没有到不了生活这样不得不在里的，但是可以不的到给的到给些啥呢？现在呢，大太阳没得天边的天，因我写小写的这天我就是写书嘛，但是写我写的本呢，没什么没什么，你把那老的也不天那完了说吧，没得讲对，没得讲天那一般这么中，都是那么到美国那我没把人家到的可能没把人那是天没了说吧，的可能要这么多把人就写了。오늘한테 가사다 유대대 배고 보나 이장 가사다 도상벌 줘버면 되베 가사 통탕벌 줘버면 되베 저기 좀 멀어서 나라지 받다 번저 신나 대다 나는 메다 뉴글라서 베라바 너무 되게 따유대대 베라지 받다 버저 저다 오냐나 대다란 대랑게 개랑도 영 게라 뉴글라서 나와 데미드 도미고 바르조로와 당티 게미게레 용소 조방 줄 유난 조지 유라지메 바르데노 저버 도셀레 멜로다 저니 노티 요주지 기주도 지발라 소보 메비你马路边那个那你路边那个不是就没那些的的，没那么多这边的没的，我们没吧，过去多没多的那个我们南极、陆基通。 동어담바로 군조 되어 마조 군조 되어 마조 바당 오메로니 군조 동동 되어 마조 체미되면 대다게 군조데바나 오마베제노 동동 되어 바당 대다게 동담바로 되어 바데바 남 오마바 따노 군조 되어 바르죠와 겨제메베 되나 샤와샤와샤다게 가서다노 다 거기서 따위도 로문디 가서 따위니明朝用东面的龙的呢得了，可是咱们都别到没有了，西边现在的学习咱们也没到，可是咱们没到吧，西边学了。听那碰碰子，就知道蛮多怕的，可是叫子的，这把龙的西边他那个可是同他们没有到我没弄，没弄在这下去，你把telephone那点不不。다 균좀들기다 가르사다 사소소 때와데리야 디코나에 동번이 해봤어요. 동번이 해야 되기서 다 다음에 투모어디 휴다라 말. 다음에 투모어디 다 데레 가르사 런주 면적에 다 계속 다음에 디 코에서서나 어디 지고래. 얘네 가르사 데데 인라 중이 통면 머리 봤었는데 데라시니 코아코지 머리 코에서 어디 계속 해야 돼. 묘거랬어. 런주 면적
런주 되게 있어.
런주 면적 런주에 되고.
런주 되게 제일 중요한 거긴 좀.
나래 런주 되게 그런 때.
So Geshe read from the bottom page 120, volume number 3 in the English translation of Lamrim Chemo to page 124. So we are back to section on special insight of Vipassana. Tibetans call it Lakdong. In this Lamrim Chemo, a great treatise on path to enlightenment. Just to remind ourselves, where we left off last week, is we talked about a common perspective on selflessness, or we call it Dagme. Yeah. And common perspective in the sense that a perspective that is commonly accepted by Buddhist schools of thought below Savatantika Madhyamika, the middle way school, sub-school. Yeah. And so that common perspective is, selflessness pertaining to lack of self-sufficient and substantially existent I or the self. In Tibetan called Kangsa Rangja Thugbe Zeyu. Rangja is self-sufficient, Zeyu is substantially existent, and Ta is the self. Okay? There is no such a self, right? And so absence of that such a self, or the emptiness of that self, or selflessness of that kind of a self is commonly accepted as selflessness in the Buddhist schools of thought below Savatantika Madhyamika school. So in other words, what we're saying here is if we ask from a common perspective, what is the source of samsaric existence? What's the root of samsara? Right? Korva. And they say that's the grasping at self-sufficient and substantially existent I or the self. Okay? And in the context of 12 interdependent links, and with which we explain how we get into samsara, and my first footnote, if we reverse the order, how we can get out of samsara, right? So the first interdependent link is avidya or marikba, ignorance. Okay? So what kind of ignorance? According to the common perspective, it is the ignorance pertaining to self-sufficient and substantially existent I or the self. Okay, we need to uproot that ignorance in order to be free from samsara. So that's the common perspective.
타바 라즈부터야 켈링을 모두 상지와 켈링고 뭐가 당메데 상지와 쉬이 당도 그러와 어때레스
So in the Sharvakayan, or the hearer's vehicle, and the particular Buddhayan, or the solitary realizer's vehicle. So what they assert is that if we realized internally that kind of selflessness, then we will be able to be free from samsara, and we can also achieve what they call enlightenment. Okay, because in those vehicles or yanas, they only accept selflessness of a person, Kangsagi Tagme in Tibetan, but they do not accept selflessness of phenomena, Choji Tagme. They don't accept that. Now, higher Buddhist schools of thought, Chittamatrins or the mind-only school of thought, Semzampa and above, okay, they assert two types of selflessness of a person and selflessness of phenomena. So in order to be enlightened, right, it's not just enough to realize the selflessness of a person, but one must also realize the selflessness of phenomena, Choji Tangme in Tibetan. Okay? So that's in the higher Buddhist schools of thought.
The same the Geshe Tangme that this is because Sungzi the Thomasan and Jugan Thomasan, the Kanji this is that Chiro told them what to be Thomas. Chiro told you what the Kare said, this is what though they were Menjege, that sook the Chamisan, land of Jixi Yacha. Shiva the Shiva Kijik Chamation, and he had Yunte in the Yujing over the Rera Ganga to good as you were. But though they were that Shirama Nitishi, that same the was that so the Shiva didn't remember my Miche, so Ganga, Shiva Pajan of the wood park ford. In quality and Yamdo Toyaji to race. The most Duchami the day Yoma race. What is that? Duchami of this subway in the Rakbat, be able to tea Rakbat. This of a Shiruba Tonga, the Lenny Shiruton River Tongas Tananda, and the Vigaransi River Tongas, the Wadi Tonga Tishan, that Sanjaya Lam the Tisha, Titonga of Lam the Sanjaya Lam shower. What Tisha.
Sungzi, you don't do it.
You don't do it.
I don't think the Chadama because you didn't chame killing or something again.
Oh, killing it.
Really? Shiva Chame,
Oh,
get a
killing the concert. That sense of a that the Lingdeji that this heavy killing Sergio Ramodashi, killing Marwa.
So according to mind-only school of thought, Semzamba, Chittamatrins, in order to achieve enlightenment, one must realize what we call the emptiness of a duality of subject and object, right? And so because Chittamatrins or a mind-only school of thought do not accept externally existent objects, Shirutanda Duba, externally existent objects. So what they are saying is that, all these external objects that we see are basically the reflection of our subjectivity. Okay? And so in our mind, we call the pakcha, imprints or the predispositions, right? And these predispositions manifest in the form of sort of external objects, and we are perceiving them as being external objects, but in reality, those are the aspects of your own subjective experience, isn't it? So there is a non-duality between subject and object. So realizing that non-duality or emptiness of the duality between subject and object is what emptiness or selflessness is, according to Chittamatrins. And if we realize that, or we must realize that in order to be enlightened. But in the lower Buddhist schools of thought, Southern Tikas, the Dodeba, and Vaibhashikas, or the realist, we called it Chidamava, they accept duality between subject and object. Okay, what they're saying is there are partless material particles. When these partless material particles congregate, or they kind of come together, and this is how we see the visible forms, isn't it? So visible forms are the outcome of these partless material particles. They kind of mingle together and jumble together, and then they become visible somehow, right? And also they said there are partless moments of consciousness subject to perceptions. So these partless moments of consciousness again jumble together, like they kind of marry each other or something, and then that's how the consciousness is formed. Okay? So therefore, Sautrantikas and Vaibhasikas, or the followers of the sutras and the realistic, materialist, Buddhists, they believe there are partless material particles and partless moments of consciousness. Whereas in the Chitta Martin, mindfulness school, they said there are no partless material particles, there are no partless moments of consciousness. There is, as a matter of fact, no duality between subject and object. Okay, so that's their contention and their position.
치도케 랭게지다 미래니 여러와 도대지오 오마다 너지오 오마사 다 치도케 랭게데 페지 도지다바 지바레 치도케 멜레베티 수니데 예도 두즈테 셈잠바 지바레 다 민다스 페지 요마레
in the Sevatandega Madhyamika sub-school, Rangyuba, Uma Rangyuba in Tibetan, there are two I should say, groups within them. And so one is called Sautrantika, Sevatantaka, Madhyamikans. I know it's a mouthful to say. So what they are basically saying is, they, like the Sautrantikas, they assert that there are partless material particles. Okay, so they are externally existent objects, just like Sautrantika. So they kind of go with that. So these kind of Sevatantaka Madhyamikans, who are called Sautrantika, Sevatantaka Madhyamikans, so they believe in externally existent objects, Chidun in Tibetan. Then there is the Yogacharya Sevatantaka Madhyamikans. And so Yogacharya means yoga, yogic. Okay? Now they do not believe in externally existent objects. So they, as far as regarding the externally existent objects, they side with us Chitta Martins and the mind-only school. Just like mind-only school says there are no externally existent objects, so Yogacharya, Sevatantaka, Madhyamikans say, no, there are no externally existent objects. So within the Sevatantaka Madhyamikan sub-school, we find those two groups. One say, yes, there are external existent objects. These are called Sautrantika, Sevatantaka Madhyamikans. And there are those who say there are no external existent objects. These are called Yogacharya, Sevatantaka, Madhyamikan school, a sub-school.
Okay, that Ronjibu Kona, that two months down, the Mate in the Demba Meva said to do or what I think was Chikbashi. Demba Meva said that this is a lot of them now, Shavamai, but you don't 2 months do Chuba said the Gazat, that take yours and Rangi was said, what I think Meva tell and show you down with Thomas or the Shavaris.
최다리야 타라시 거로
레레 다 추다 좀 솜샤고래 셈자 베치 랑지 베치 땡주 베치 솜샤고라
나래 알아 어디 대신 차듯이 거로 와노 수노스 now the Sevatantaka Madhyamikans as a bunch of group, so their philosophy about emptiness, selflessness is what we call emptiness of true existence. Tembra Madhuba, right? Tembra is true, and Dhub is existence. Okay, so they believe in the absence of true existence. That's their language, or the emptiness of true existence. Tembra Madhuba. Remember my second footnote? There are too many terminologies look kind of sound alike, so this is why I'm repeating it. And so what we asked them, what do you really mean by that? Like phenomena are not truly existent, or they don't have true existence. What do you mean by that? Is what they're saying that there is no phenomenon that exists in and of itself, objectively, from its own side, right, without being posited as appearing to what called to a valid perception. Basically, they're saying that things are posited from how they from appearing to apprehending valid perceptions, there isn't any phenomenon that exists in and of itself without relying upon a subjectivity or a subjective perception. Okay, so such how should I say? So that is their identification of what we call object of negation. Right? What is true existence? True existence means something existing in and of itself objectively from its own side, without relying upon a subjectivity, without appearing to a subjective perception. Yeah, so that's their position about what called a true existence. And so they said there is no such phenomena. So that means emptiness of true existence must be realized in order to achieve enlightenment, according to Sevatandika Madhyamikans.
Okay, that law name is the correct person. This is what that. Congresswoman, she never runs to us on the mind, but Phuntsok was a candidate of a lot of doing the civil, lot of doing will you ever that you ever shower.
So what do we mean by something that is not posited by way of appearing to I said to use the lo töntin means valid perception. That's how I translated this, or a correct perception, the töntimba. So what does it mean? According to Geshe's explanation, is that we believe in a valid perception of a vase, isn't it? A pot. A pot appears, correctly to a valid perception that apprehends the pot, isn't it? It appears as a pot, it's perceived as a pot. So that's agreeable, right? That's valid. Okay. Invalid perceptions or incorrect perceptions are, for example, due to certain factors. For some people, white snow mountain appears as a yellow mountain, right? So that is like incorrect appearance, isn't it? I mean, snow is never yellow. So if it is appearing as yellow to you, boy, go and check your eyes. That's not in the Lamrim. I'm throwing it over there. Okay. Or that we talk about, like if somebody believes that I have spotted a horn on a rabbit's head, right? That the rabbit has horns, right? If somebody's saying, well, that is invalid perception, right? Rabbits don't, maybe they have a long ears, but they don't have a horn, right? So that's invalid perceptions, okay? So any correct perceptions, whether it's a perception of a vase or whatever you name it, these are called lo töntin, right? Valid perceptions. Okay.
Oh, dear. So that the ten bed of the Yahuda, and the 10 years in the target with the Rangibe in the take hours, you met Dalan showers, you met Pesha showers. So the tea had some girls and now. Continue because the Rangiba, you won't ever share. No, if I shall was share, in so that 10 years in the lush of them, you want to go Marwa. The Rangiba usually want to go or this. The Gozan Garizana, you want to stand me now. Any you might do the Zelanga Majav, Milanga Jajan, the young Talan to use a Marwa. The Milanga Jav, Zelanga, Ningasona in the Talan to Warwa. Or she you got go out using the teacher, Takaji. Young Zel make Jav, they make me never shoot me, Zelanga Jav in the Timothy Tongo Marwa. That you got sounds on Tongo.
Sevatandika Madhyamikans, Uma Rangjuba in Tibetan, and Prasangika Madhyamikans, Uma Tenjuba, their standpoint on what emptiness is differs, right? Qualitatively, as a matter of fact. And they may use different examples, they prefer, I should say, different examples to illustrate their standpoint on emptiness. Sevatandika Madhyamikans use what we call magical creation, magic, as an example to make their assertion on the standpoint. Whereas Prasangika Madhyamikans, they use another example of a coiled rope, right, which appears like a snake, right? Takradril, right? A coiled rope which appears like a snake. So that example is used to talk about their view of emptiness. Okay. So let's go back to the real difference between these two schools of thought. They both are Madhyamikans, middle way philosophers, but one is called Prasangika, we call it the highest level, and the other one is called Sevatantikas. Okay? According to Sevatantika Madhyamikans, Umar Rangkyuba in Tibetan, they believe the way things exist is, there's something that exists from the side of a phenomenon, and then something is labeled from subjective point of view. So it is a combination of, right, sort of a objective reality and subjective label. Okay? And this is how they said it exists. Okay? If nothing exists from its own side, something like that at all, then they said things can't exist at all. Okay? Something really exists from the side of a phenomenon, but that's not good enough to exist. Then something is labeled onto that. So through this kind of integrated sort of a combo, a combination of some kind, they exist. So the example they use is called gyuma, illusion or magical creation. So a magician, right, by using his or her magic tricks and magic incantations, can influence our perceptions, and then we can believe that, wow, there are real horses and elephants. But they basically created the horses and elephants out of the twigs and the pebbles and whatever, nothing really there. Okay? And they said, but there's something, it has to have a basis. For example, they said, if a magician were to use the mantra or whatever the trick to influence the materials they use to create the magic, but they do not use the mantra to influence our perception, we are still not going to perceive elephants and horses, okay? And vice versa. But a magician has to use the trick or the power to be able to influence both the materials they use, magic materials, what we call magic wand, right? But in this, not we have. But that, and also they have to influence our perceptions. And in that way, we as spectators, feel like we are seeing horses and elephants. So this is their example to say that something exists from the side of the object, whether it is in the magic substance or there's something with our faculty. Something exists and something is labeled onto that. So through that combination, phenomena exists. Of course, Prasangika Madhyamikans say no, nothing exists from its own side at all, right? This is where they differ. They said, no, everything is merely labeled, right, onto something. There's nothing exists from its own side. So that's a big difference between Prasangika Madhyamikans and Sevatantika Madhyamikans. So Sevatantika Madhyamikans believe in some kind of objective reality.
Because Ranju Jimmy Pay showed the Nagba in Sigdo, showed the Nagba said the Codon was had the Teleganji. You go to see what Lucia Insuya did, Yabush Dodo. Things and that sure got a country to down what he told you. Let's Lucia the you go Nizo. Yajing Digumari, I think what it had a Jimmy down on Yogoda. No, so that showed the Nagba in Saturday. No, sure. That the Yoga got blue farm of the Unity Yomara. Said that target will go figure so that Yomara. That you may say, I check on a lot in Tonga mother. Tell a young Jago to Vesoshiva Yomara. No, of course, Sevatantika Madhyamikas may use other examples, but this, the magical creation or the magic is they considered as the best example to illustrate the standpoint. Basically, they're saying that if a magician doesn't have a magic material, right, and if there are no spectators, then you cannot create the magic. There is something objectively exists, and then through the combination of magic power and all those things, then you can create horses and elephants, right? And people believe in those. Whereas Prasangika Madhyamikans, Umatenjuba say nothing exists objectively from its own side. Everything is merely labeled. And they use many examples, but their preferred example is the coiled rope, right? So of course, certain conditions has to be met, how this works, right? It's a slightly dark corner, there's kind of coiled rope, right? And you are not sure whether it is, maybe you have a bad eye or something like me, you really don't know it's a snake or it's a whatever it is. So it really appears as snake to you. Right? Nobody has to play magic on us, right? Nobody has to trick us. It's just a condition, a little dark,
there's a coiled rope. My eye is a poor eye, so I kind of feel like I'm scared of a snake or something. So all this combination, we believe there is a snake, but when we go there is nothing at all, right? And so that's the example Prasangika mathematicians use to say how nothing exists from its own side. Everything is a mental projection, mental labeling.
this is that. Because 탁자 루도서 로데다 간저번도 강바저 분바에서 로디 분바다 탁자인데 루샤당 산 체요 말라고 직보직양레스 이나다 그 로디 진당 힘을이야 체마힘 뇌면 체바 예스거다 그리고 탁자 루징에들 거 힘을 탁베딘 루요 말고 루 동시야요 말봐 다 분바가완데 그런 거 등대되는데 봐 쉬어든 동시야 그거 제만 하시지 체면을 줘요 봐 근데 다시샤는 비게 세면내면은 모두 지금 의샤도 직보직양 있어.
No, sure. According to Prasangika mathematicians, they said the way our conceptual thought labels a vase as a vase, and the way our conceptual thought labels a coiled rope as a snake, in terms of how we label it, is exactly the same thing. But where we find the difference is in terms of the basis upon which something is labeled onto. In the case of a coiled rope, it's a total misperception there's a snake, because a coiled rope does not have a snake or any snake part. It has nothing, right? So therefore, we call it what we call the maybe wrong perception or the false perception. Whereas in the case of a vase, right, it's not a completely fictitious, because a vase performs certain function, right? Vase has certain characteristics. It can hold the water. I don't know, whatever it is doing. It has some functionality. So that basis is valid, right? The basis on which we label vase, that basis is valid. It has characteristics. It functions. Whereas the basis upon which a snake is projected onto, in the case of a coiled rope, that basis is baseless, actually, right? False.
데레 제도다 탁제된이 류메와 등한조 간게 도도거라 탁제고 류메와 도도거라 다다도 쉬셔당 한조 용게 쉬어도 된게 인피게 라히르고 메와세 등한도 도도 말바 미지 로 샤당 직보직경 레세 어디서다.
So in the case of a coiled rope appearing as a snake to us, given all those conditions, but we can easily investigate and find out there is no snake there, isn't it? We can just, it's not difficult to understand that what we initially thought is a snake is not a snake. It's just a piece of rope coiled like a snake, right? That is not difficult to understand. But whereas, emptiness of intrinsic existence, which is the ultimate nature of every phenomenon that we experience in everyday life, now that's something we find difficult to understand it, right? I mean, it's very difficult for us to understand or even experience the emptiness of intrinsic existence of a vase, right, that we use in our everyday life. But in the case of how our conceptual thought imputes those labels onto something, the process is the same. Yeah.
다기 당주셔야 돼. 치료부터 다기 당주 가가세. 다기 당주 로셔고로. 다때 지라마다 그 로스면도 다기 땡는 게 말해. 수녀를 이 땅으로. 다 니네 정주 벌써도 되는도 그 당주 로에 봐 조금 좀 셔야 돼. 너희들이 유나 조 로라래야 시도 와. 다 대죠 로 관라라래 있어 어디 두거라. 근데 쳐봐 두고. 다 그다 셔야 된다. 뭐한두야 또 어디에서 돼. 그래서는 오마오메데 야 고마고마래 팽기도 써야 돼. 그거지 당분 대여라. 되는 집 나긴 다 열시에서 되는 저셔 신로. 다 주지 대여도 내가 로셔봐 뭐도 나기 코로나데 바로 파자 뭐 코로나 땡 메바 두고로 와. 어디 예로 더더 되지도.
Dakshi, basis of imputation, and Daksha, imputed reality or a characteristic. Okay, and how these two things are conceptualized and understood differs a lot, between certain non-Buddhist schools of thought, primarily Hindus in my footnote, and then Buddhist schools of thought. In certain non-Buddhist school of thought, they do assert there is a basis of imputation, and then there is the maybe imputed characteristic label. But they see them as if completely separate, right? They have nothing to do with each other, almost like two separate entities. Okay, so that's one way they think about. But in the Buddhist schools of thought, even the Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas, they do accept that there is a relationship, quite intimate relationship between basis of imputation and imputed reality, if you will. And so they said that the characteristic of an object should be findable on that basis, right? It cannot be found on some other things. It must be found on whatever the basis is, right? At least, their view is little, how should I say, more intimate, right? Relationship between the two, basis of imputation and the imputed reality. And now what the Pasangikas are saying is that what's imputed on to the basis, right, it's just a mental projection. It's unfindable, right? If we're going to look for, right, okay, there is the basis of imputation. Something is imputed onto that. Now, what is the imputed phenomenon? You try to investigate it, right? You're not going to find it. So what that tells us is that it exists, but it exists as a mere label, merely labeled reality. It is not something existing from its side. So that's Prasangika Madhyamika's standpoint.
我对了，现在咱的老人节目光看多了，听就到块么的，现在到开明对吧？看了现在的老人节目在的他，比成年的这个人讲嘛了，刚刚个别个，从事人那考头啊，听这个头呢，伢子人家上写是吧？现在第一的当个，伢人有的现在是处用公规了，大都这些个是吧？但能给他的国法上是这样的话，真的这些能有这些就是刚刚，对不对？刚刚对吧？他写过。但这几个问题写没对吧？是的，让大家也看到去，那么恐怕都是我们做嘛，往是三楼楼当呢，听就到考那个的是，这个送下去的，你他的现在写过已经挺意思。
So I might have mentioned this to you before also, and once again I said that, the presentations or the positions of the lower schools of thought, if we really study them well, it really facilitates us to understand the positions of the higher schools of thought. So in that sense, it is like the rungs in a ladder, right? Steps you can go climb up. If you don't understand, what is asserted in the lower schools of thought, we might find it difficult to understand what is accepted or asserted in the higher schools of thought. So that's what our lineage masters say, that we should study different schools of thought to be able to understand the philosophical differences and in what way they are different, and all of that. But in this Lamrim textbook, this primarily everything is presented from Prasangika Madhyamika point of view. Okay? And the reason for doing that is because Lamrim is usually be seen as more like a practice guide, right? It's meant for those who have studied for many years and they know the inside out, but they need to practice, or people who don't have much time but they want to practice. So Lamrim is more like a practice guide, and so therefore Lama Tsongkhapa maybe felt that he doesn't want to talk about every different schools of thought here, which is more confusing and making it more difficult. So he just wants to present it from Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, just one perspective, just follow that. Okay? Whereas in other textbooks, such as we called Uma Kongpa Rapsal, Unraveling Thought of the Middle Way, or Sashi Tikchen, the commentary on the fundamental wisdom, or the eloquent explanation or the lecture setting. So in those things, we might find more critical approaches, right? Different schools' viewpoints are presented and critiqued and, like that, but not in the Lamrim so much. Lamrim is presented from Prasangika Madhyamika point of view mostly. So essence of eloquent explanation, like say Ningbo, not the lecture setting. Okay. Lecture Ningbo is the essence of eloquent explanation.
다 가르쳐서 당보 다 대관 때는 봐 유전의 가르치고 되세요다. 저 토바차 대관의 가르사 냥연데 봐도 간이셔는서 다 간지 그 톱자 타도 가르 미네미 냥연져야 돼 가르쳐서 미네미 냥돼서야 제일 말해. 어디 가르쳐서 와라. 티 가르치래베시. 티 톱지 람디 가르치래베. 어디니 들다 어치도 어디 가르쳐서는 다 토바차 데레스 가지 신앙 시원은 나서바디 디코는 이노한 디탑지 에네 박자세바 레마도질 코는 랑 생이지 마도바 마도바 랑 생이 저바 동베 에네 동이디 고말 데네 에네 난지 다근즈바 탐지 세바시도와 다 상지 사세고 다 박자제바 세야게 에네 디 상지 추구 다디 베제 라지나다 샤지 추구 샤죠 오지레와 디 추구 데리 톱자도 데리스다 데려야 건지 상지 사게야 동이 데라 랑이남다 샤지 추구 세고로와 다 단다 디 고된데라 두니 bombe 빵바데라 에네 로르나다 샤르켜 바세고로와 어디서 간지 리미 디빵 담보 요에니 에네 람고는 메버서 현주이로와 다 랑이나다 데디 그 랑시 주베 타바데레디 다 상지도 자고 샤고만 간저 간갈야 랑시 쳔마데 담보 빵거야 가요 뭐 담보건 메메 가르와 어딜다 저도 톱자도디 이데 톱자디 가데 토에서는 에네 톱당 가데서는 데코는 너도 나나데라 에네 데코 랑시 메헤도 되었는 거레스 아따데 여바나디 나와다디 메바 베게테바 테 komne sinya ge sanji shogu joro watati topja de teres ta topji de ko da di toni gomgo go wa gomgo go res go da
So then there's this explanation of the need to understand what we call minebe nyangde, which we literally translate as a non-abiding enlightenment or nirvana, right? And it's not an eloquent translation in English. But why we literally translate that is, I don't know what number is my footnote. Maybe I have to throw a footnote here. Non-abiding enlightenment, since it neither abides on the extreme of cyclic existence, nor on the extreme of solitary peace of nirvana, right? That's called non-abiding. It does not abide on the two extremes, okay? So that footnote, just for those who need the footnote. So basically, it is a complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. It's another way to say Buddhahood is called, right, non-abiding enlightenment or nirvana. And that's our ultimate, goal. And so in order to achieve that goal, we also need to realize and understand the emptiness. Okay? Realization of emptiness is path by which we will be able to achieve enlightenment. So a part of, like, when we talk about enlightenment, it has different dimensions and aspects, as you know. There is what we call naturally abiding enlightened body, right? Sava bhavika kaya, right? The truth body, right, has different aspects. One is called naturally abiding truth body. Yeah? And that basically refers to, just to simplify it, is the ultimate nature or the emptiness of omniscient mind. Okay? And it's a reality. It's not something we need to create it or something. That's how, what it is. Okay? But we have not yet realized that. That's part of our, striving for enlightenment. When we achieve enlightenment, we also, right, achieve what we call natural truth body. Yeah, naturally abiding truth body. And to realize that aspect of enlightenment, we need to realize emptiness. Yeah? And so what Geshe explains is that at the moment, although nothing exists intrinsically in and of itself, but things appear to us as if that's how they exist. Yeah. So that is called intrinsic reality. intrinsic reality does not exist, but from our point of view, how things appear to us, we feel that everything exists intrinsically, and we believe that's how it is. Okay? And so we need to get rid of that grasping, that belief in the intrinsic reality. Okay? And for that, we need to understand how everything lacks intrinsic reality. So that means everything is empty of intrinsic reality. So that realization will help us to achieve natural Dharmakaya or the truth body eventually. So as I said, there are different aspects of enlightenment. There's a natural Dharmakaya or the truth body, which is basically the emptiness of the omniscient mind. And then there's the Jnana Dharmakaya, right? Wisdom truth body, which is the omniscient mind itself. But the omniscient mind itself is achieved by way of what we call getting rid of, from within our mind, the two types of mental obscuration, right? Delusions or obscuration to liberation and obscuration to omniscient state. And those obscurations exist, right? It's not a fiction, right? Those two types of obscurations exist in our mind, and these are the objects of abandonment. Once we abandon them completely, then we realize what we call it's called the adventitious enlightened body, which is basically the wisdom, right, the side of it, because something that is outcome of getting rid of the two mental obscurations. Let me see, did I miss anything? No. A technical term in Buddhism is called Gyeltsen, truth of cessation or true cessation, isn't it? And so true cessation is defined basically as a purified, let me see how does it work. Sort of the purified nature of the emptiness of our mind. Okay, let me translate the explanation given on this. The ultimate nature of our mind is emptiness of intrinsic reality, right? That's the emptiness. Okay? But at the moment, we don't see that reality. Why? Because our mind is obscured. It is as if the emptiness of mind is obscured by all our defilements, mental obscurations. Okay? But as we do our practice, cultivate the paths, and these mental obscurations are eliminated or purified, then the emptiness of the mind becomes more obvious to us, isn't it? That's how we realize the emptiness nature of the mind. When all the obscurations are completely purified, then the emptiness of the mind just is right there, isn't it? We see it, right? That's called the realization of emptiness, right? So from the ultimate standpoint, so the realization of the emptiness of the mind is the natural truth body, enlightened body, isn't it? At the moment, we don't realize it because it's obscured by defilements. And the defilements are adventitious, temporary, right? And these are removable. They can be purifiable. So once we purify all the defilements, we also achieve certain realization. That's called adventitious state, right? Because all the wisdom side of it. So basically, what's happening is, on the basis of one thing, the emptiness of the mind, we gain two things, right? Once we realize the emptiness, that's called true cessation. But then our mind realizing the emptiness, that is the result of purifying all our defilements, isn't it? It is as if those two sort of realizations come together on the same basis. Okay.
추이 되면 더 그러는 거대 저거로 추이 되는 거대서 로스 가요 그 최신세가 저거로 다 얘도 인스가요 다디게서 세우고 되들이 저거로 어디 다다데 어디 추이 송마자 뭐 다 톱자데 거지 성지 사이야 다다 세다 구시요로 와 다다 쇼구디 시고도 와 쇼구디야 다 디시고 다들 이시고시 애들 lungu두고 저다 구시요로 와 거지 성지가 뭐야 다들 톱아샤와데 그다 가르에서 디 구시가 샤쇼로 와 다들 뭐 다들 쇼구샤도 와 어디 샤쇼
Of course, I don't want to complicate the matter here. Of course, in different texts, sometimes, what is truth cessation or true cessation, Gokten? Maybe there's different perspectives, right? What I said is one way, which says that emptiness of our mind is really regarded. The purified nature, let's say, emptiness of our mind is the true cessation. But others might say, like, no, it's not the emptiness of the mind, it's something else. So there are different viewpoints, okay? Just want to mention that. And of course, as you might have heard, that when we talk about Buddhahood, enlightenment, we talk about kayas or the enlightened bodies, and usually we talk about 4 enlightened bodies, right? There is the Dharmakaya, truth body, okay? And Dharmakaya has 2. There is the natural truth body, and then there is the wisdom truth body, okay? And then we have the complete resource body or Sambhogakaya, complete enjoyment body, as we sometimes translate it. And then we have the Nirmana Kaya or the emanation body, right? Turgu, right? Those are the 4 dimensions of enlightened bodies, if you will. And when we become Buddha, we achieve all of them, not like we will have 1 or the 2 and not the other. It's just impossible. We will have all of those enlightened aspects.
데코는 지다주부 렘반데 저 수인데 텔리코 뭐든 데니 율 면도버 통 다데레 다다데 성지에 거뭐 통도 깨야 로 렘바도 가르치고서는 더뭐 코알 비고 눈에도 면도 내려와 눈에도 면도 눈에도 논도 깨고 그랬어 데 눈에 논도 깨는데 눈에데 좀말로나 눈에 거 놓아요 말봐 진짜 다 욕하래 제제니 근데 요데 다군에다 통모 머리가 다들 유튜브한테 머리가 강제 다 직다스는 되게 그래봐 직다디 발대 텔레페 예바지 봐 고고래서 다 예바 야보니 소나 다 고야 답이시 그래봐 그래서 그래 예바지 봐 고시야지 도알
So when we look at kind of a process by which we may find ourselves sincerely striving for enlightenment as our final goal, it all starts with really understanding deeply nature of suffering in samsara. Isn't it? The more we understand the suffering in samsara, then we develop the real wish, right, to abandon it. Right? Nobody wishes for suffering. Right? So I want to get rid of the suffering. Okay? And so in order to get rid of the suffering, what we really need to do is we have to investigate and find out the source of the suffering. We call it the root, sawa, right? If we don't find the root, then we are not going to be able to uproot the suffering. We might just do some, what call those cosmetic changes here and there, right? And so when we look at the root of the suffering, suffering, we find avidya or the ignorance. And the kind of ignorance we talk about is grasping at intrinsic reality. Okay? And that is the root of the suffering. So once we realize this is it, right? This is the root of the suffering. There is no any other root. So I must get rid of this. Then we will find a way or the method, antidote to counteract, to uproot this ignorance.
제가 딜이야 이제 자와딘 직다도 통화인자. 단 직다도 봉하다 디시 오르세. 그렇다. 지당한조야 에네 뇌자다고 컨트롤되어이나 뇌자에는 믿어봐 고면야 내가 너야다고 컨트롤이나 컨트롤 좀다 그래서 내가 봐 손줘야지 채워라. 다들 직다셔야 될 근데 좀다는 거 손줘야지요 말이고. 그런 힘이 봐라. 진상 공개도 마다 봐도 걸 내가 말이야. 네 세주면 나 대부분 네모이 라와. 어째도 되래서.
So once we really come to a point where we become very certain that, grasping at or that ignorance pertaining to intrinsic reality is the root cause of all suffering, we know that, then we will try to find a method or the way to get rid of that. Okay? And so here, as Geshe started to explain, like in the case of other, how should I say, afflictive emotional experiences, sometimes we find temporary antidotes, right? If we are too much attached to an attractive body or attractive object or something, if we reflect on the repulsive nature of the body and the object, right, temporarily it will decrease our at least intensity of the attachment to the body and the object, right? It's not the ultimate solution, but temporarily it works, right? Because we are so attached, because you only see the good thing or sort of like projected or created good things. Now we set the other reality like, really, Or if we, get angry or mad, so temporarily, if we can pause and think about the destructive nature of anger, it can help us to temporarily, right, subside or bring down the intensity of the anger. Okay. But that's not how it works, dealing with that root ignorance, fundamental ignorance. You can think about all the demerits, all the disadvantages of this ignorance. It's really not going to do much to it. It'll just stay put, right? So the only way to challenge this particular ignorance is if we study how this ignorance is perceiving things to exist. How do things appear to exist to that ignorant mind or the conception, and how that ignorant conception is grasping at that projected reality. And then we can figure out, like, do the things exist really that way, just the way our ignorant mind thinks it is? It doesn't. So once we know that, that's the kind of the secret key, isn't it? Oh, nothing really exists the way our mind thinks it exists, and that's the only way to challenge this fundamental ignorance.
Okay.
So that's why in the Buddhist literatures you might come across this kind of expression or technical use called 显于 meba tokwa. We have to understand that the referent object, 显于, of our ignorant conception does not exist, isn't it? Our ignorant conception, arises in relation to certain object, right? That referent object. In other words, how things appear to exist to it and how it believes that things exist that way. That belief, that reference does not exist at all. Okay? And so to be able to get to that, so we look at it from different approaches. So one way is we have to make every effort and use the critical thinking, logic, investigation to establish that nothing exists intrinsically. Right? Intrinsic existence does not exist. Are you with me? Right? So we have to use logic, critical thinking, everything says there is nothing that exists intrinsically, one. Number two, we have to use the logic, analysis, critical thinking to establish that as a matter of fact, everything is empty of intrinsic reality, isn't it? So we are using two-pronged strategy. One is that there is no intrinsic reality. Two is that everything is empty of intrinsic reality or intrinsic existence.
In the dad driven zimzin of that dad was like said, Gashe said the injiming goes, that the mangina, that Tusa Gangan, what it said the mangine, any Shetalunga, any Gaja Sazaka Amadava or Tidaganga did say the Tango Shengo.
So as we apply critical analysis and thinking, right, and where does it all begin? The step number one is what we call precisely identifying what is negated or refuted, the object of refutation or negation. Gakcha in Tibetan. Gakcha means something you object to, right? Object of negation or refutation must be identified precisely. When we fail to do that, then we might fall into different extremities. Either we become a nihilist, right? We refute too much, that now we said nothing exists at all. right? Everything is baloney, right? So now we become completely annihilist and nihilist, and we said, okay, like Geshe didn't say that, okay, do whatever, but I almost said that as a footnote. So that's the one problem. We fall into the extreme of annihilation or nihilism. Or that we don't refute enough of that we still grasp onto to the intrinsic reality in some way or to some extent. So we're still stuck, isn't it? So therefore, precisely identifying the object of negation is, right, the number one step is the most important step, okay, in our analysis.
No.
So why is it important for us to make every effort to precisely identify, have a clarity of thought about what is the object of negation? It's just like ordinarily speaking, right? And we have been entrusted to find a person called Lobsang, but we have no idea who Lobsang is. We have no image, nothing. Then how are we ever going to find Lobsang, right? We are not going to find Lobsang. So that's what it is. So why do we find it extremely challenging and difficult to identify the object of negation, gaksha, or the self, that is the object of negation? The reason is that, the self that doesn't exist, which needs to be refuted, and the self that exists, we call conventional self, they are somehow mixed together in our experience and perception, isn't it? We find it very difficult to differentiate them from one another. They're kind of like bundled together, right? They kind of become a union of some kind in our mind. So therefore, we find it very challenging to precisely identify the kind of self that does not exist and to assert the kind of self that does exist, right? There is conventional I of the self that is the basis of our karmic actions and experiences of karmic results, isn't it? That self exists. But then that kind of conventional self image gets mixed with the intrinsic self that doesn't exist at all. And so in our experiences, those two selves are somehow mingled together. And as a matter of fact, it is said that until we realize emptiness, it is very, very difficult to truly differentiate between the two kinds of self.
Okay. This is that time you in the church of current lawyer, Zindu Songana de they may have us in chick, they buy you may come have the major chick, they don't care some Zindu some mandata, trade this in Zindu some didn't dago marva. That on to Tony Toba they may have us the Yomarva. They know that they may come have the major chick, and they don't care what you are eating on the Yorta.
Categorically stated, there are three ways in which things could appear, theoretically, to our perceptions. Okay? One, that things could appear to us as being empty of intrinsic reality. And that's not in our case, isn't it? We haven't realized it, so we don't have that. And the other one is the things appearing to us as intrinsically existent. Okay? And the third option is things neither appear to us as intrinsically existent nor as non-intrinsically existent. Okay? So of these three different options, the way of appearances, what we experience are the latter two. Either they appear to us as intrinsically existent, or they appear to us as neither intrinsically existent nor non-intrinsically existent. I know it sounds like a mantra now here, right? So,
oh, that is that Zikabon, that country, Nonzula Ganga, Lo Ganga, Lo Hiring, Lo Tontu Shagua, Ganga Lo Ganga, Danzika again. 现在变得 rob 的这是相对性的小的，变得他就吃了地方做什么做，因为他也过什么做，穷也考也做啊，我天天在平时生意那不得了的，电路开不起过嘛是吧？但说说这个皮肤搞不行那个着，要么那东西行不行那个着。没对了，是那个就是我的休息着，他那个就是他现在可别休息时候多，我今天看的现在对了现在现在要么多不，我今天看的了，因为老现在这个样，看见这个多，看今天看的这个看来看去，对，是不大开发性生活的是，休息不中时人家可把控住了吧？
好了，谢谢个大伙。
对，是要不。休息站没说的别人的那些大伙，大家去看一下。我是特别在那样过把休息不着的。我提醒我的是。
So Geshe said, this is our challenge. How do we recognize that things appear to our perceptions either as intrinsically existent, or maybe in some situations. They simply appear to us as neither intrinsically existent nor non-intrinsically existent. Yeah? And this is what he's thinking. There are certain, things we experience, like say, we just ordinarily think, okay, I feel like going out today, right? I don't want to stay home. Or that I feel really sleepy, I'm going to go sleep. At such experiences, he thinks that maybe how, right, we experience those realities is neither intrinsically existent nor non-intrinsically existent. It's just, it's kind of a routine thing. But in situations where we are very excited, right? I mean, for whatever reason, maybe we want, Geshe didn't say that, okay, but what was that big lotto somebody won? Yeah, power lotto. Now we're talking, right? So if we won that one, that moment we win it, the sense of I, right, that intensive real sense of I is just cranked up to the T, and that's a good opportunity. Or when we are very sad, right, it kind of the whole sky has fallen on our head, as we Tibetans say, collapsed. At such time also, the intrinsic sense of I really seems to appear quite big. Or that when somebody praises us like anything, like you are the whatever, right? Or somebody criticizes us like, you are the devil, or something. At such times, the way we process I, the sense of I, could be very strongly, related to intrinsic reality sense of I. Yeah. So at such time, if we could, seize the opportunity with our introspection very skillfully, like a spy, look at our own I, then we might get a little sense of what it is, isn't it? But don't use introspection too strongly, right? It's just like, then that intensity goes down, and then we miss opportunity. So we have to use introspection very trained and skillful way that a part of our mind is watching itself, right? When we are so excited, when we are so sad, when we are praised like anything, or when we are critiqued like anything, on such occasions, right? So we might find opportunities to look at, right, our sense of I.
我这里大地现在刚上木什么的，现在看不起我了。现在，但什么都用过了吧？他切他弄着牛肉嘛用过了，这刚上木嘛是点的凶的，是感觉。
And of course, we will talk more about these things as we progress in this section on special insight, where we will talk about, the extreme views, right? Nihilism or nihilism or eternalism. So all of those things are related to this, not being able to identify precisely the object of negation. So either you refute too much and you refute everything, right? Now nothing exists. Or that you don't refute enough of it, so therefore you're still kind of, glued to a certain sense of intrinsic reality. So we will talk more about those extreme viewpoints as we progress in this text.
가사칼 걸레딩이 소리 냠도 제데베 소리 양지 소소 매버 셀라마세 소리 샤고도와
No, sir.
디레스 샤고서 나가
No, sir.
링링스나
No, sir. So the expressions lamas use in the teaching with the Tibetan, I think it gets probably more sense of like with Lingling is a sense of sometimes it's that like a fuzzy notion of I. Okay, sometimes it's that fixed sense of I. It appears to us, and so what happens is I think wherever we go, because our body is there, right, and we feel like that I is somehow attached to the body. You know, wherever the body goes, that I is somewhere there. Or maybe that I is somewhere pervades the whole psychosomatic systems, right? It's somewhere there. It's kind of hiding somewhere, or you know. So we have some kind of a, I should say, sometimes very fuzzy sense of that, and sometimes very fixed entity sense of that. Yeah. So that you know is an indication of intrinsic sense of I or the self. No.
我弟弟现在的，他搞上我身上的，看这时候谈到他，说是别下落，因为别搞上我，他先个是先的，先个什么，别下落，真的说是上梦当，可是娘用肉说是讲他哦，他你这是因为啥什么，说是用到了被我身上么的，没想到说下个要完了。
So in terms of identifying precise object of negation, right, basically it falls upon one's own personal responsibility effort. Of course, we study about it, we read the literature on it, we listen to the commentary and explanation teaching on it, but finally, what it really boils down is we ourselves have to kind of contemplate, right, reflect upon it and figure it out for ourselves, right? Nobody can figure it out for each other, you know, because based upon our own mental reflection, contemplation, observations, we have to figure out, oh, maybe this is what it means to be now intrinsic sense of self, you know. I started to feel, right? So this is how it goes back to one's personal experiences.
我弟现在等等的，搞上我身上的开始啥，他讲的那么就是我们嘞，接着么说了么会是吧？真没拉这个的，真没拉这个，他带花就像毕竟他面头上这个小舅么是，可是。ఇది కలే కలిసి తమ తాత రెగ్యులర్ తినే దే సమ మమ తా యా పెజాలో తినే హెంబ ది ఠాడు తా తినే 지 당번 니레 미로서 తినే 야도 땅게 다 컨좀 도지 고니 타나 지와 시베는 다고 지 무슨 토야 여러 와 되면도 돈이 또 용 말봐.
And as Lama Tsongkhapa has said that we really need to make every effort to be able to identify precisely the kind of self that forms the object of negation and it doesn't exist. And we should not stop at any level like, you know, sometimes we might feel like, you know, I think now I have got a pretty good sense of what it is, right? Kind of estimated sense of it. No, not good enough. We just have to investigate and think and read and, you know, clarify in our own thinking what it is, right? Until we really get to what it is. Yeah, so don't live at some estimation level. Like, okay, now I think I have read a lot of books. I have listened to many teachings. This seems like, yeah, kind of right about. No, you know, we have to be sure about it, you know, to that extent.
You know, yeah. 제일 못해서 리게지 못해요. 다 다음에 마셔도 다 소소는지 당시에 간제 시기도 어디 무엇을 희부케지 모르겠어. 때문에 담바요 말이요 말해서 얘네 라이도 늦은데 열심히 피겠다. 타니도 자대로 다 자세 생일도 있는 배 담에 있으면 담바도 예나 한들에 시고다. 그 담바마 제 동마도 된데 배수서 뭐셔요 말해. 때 마도 늦은데요. 루지 릭반데요. 마도 매바당도 세스라. 소소 뭐든 칸데 나가지고 와. 근데 팬도 되고 말아.
And as Geshe has quoted the words of Lama Tsongkhapa in his works, that Lama Tsongkhapa really advises very strongly that we should apply the teaching to our own lives and then engage in deep personal reflection, observation, and figure it out. Okay, and so we really have to look at basically the innately developed sense of intrinsic reality, right? Not the intellectually formed sort of. We are not talking about that. We said innately developed. Lenje means innately developed sense of intrinsic reality. And that really only could be figured out through our own critical thinking and approach, not so much only reading and listening to teachings. As Geshe said, I mean, he said that, like, for example, in the monastic universities, right, monk scholars spend years and years, they're very good at the logic, and if you tell everybody, like, well, maybe something exists intrinsically. They will jump their gun at you like, what? That can't be because they haven't trained like anything. So you are intellectually kind of very astute and very good and very sharp and you can master all the logics in the world. But Lama Zang was not good enough. If you haven't applied it to yourself and you figured it out from experiential point of view, all that intellectualization is just, intellectual exercise. He said, that's not good enough. Okay. So there is a lesson for us as well. Right?
我的连夜的我的七万兄，但连夜的滚大小，连夜在的那个的，你不是出去用个可能硬个，没啥个别，所以现在好嘛，整个月份来，真的是好嘛，这是连夜生活是吧？他去了不就当着就到我们大家就有点的两把抽过都点点的这样就有点点的样子个的那滚大生活是有点开没不，硬个这个的连夜生活的是。
So that's why. Lamas often talk about two types of grasping. Intellectual grasping, we call Phuntsok, or imputed grasping, if you will. And then there's the innately developed grasping, Lenje. Lenje means inborn grasping, if you will. So that inborn grasping, Lenje, it really exists in the minds of all sentient beings, right? Even the smallest insects, have that. And sometimes we even don't know what it is, right? We kind of like, we don't know. We just kind of, it's too maybe close home. We don't know it. But that's what we have to figure out. Intellectually formed grasping are due to, studying different schools of thought, whether it's non-Buddhist schools of thought or Buddhist schools of thought, right? And then you subscribe to a certain position. Like in the Southern Tika school, this is what I believe in. I really believe in that. So that kind of grasping could be intellectually formed grasping, which is not shared by everybody else who don't believe in that school, right? But the innately developed, inborn grasping is something we all have, right, shared. Okay, we will stop there today, and we welcome your questions and observations.
Oh my. Okay. Let's start on page 120 on the bottom.
Page which?
120 on the bottom.
Okay, 120 at the bottom, yeah.
Just gonna clarify a few things just so that I don't have a doubt in my mind. Vachanda Kirti's clear words. It says, yogis who wish to enter reality and who wish to eliminate all afflictions and faults examine the question. What does the cyclic existence have as its root? When they thoroughly investigate this, they see that the cyclic existence has as root the reifying view of the perishing aggregates. That's the jikta, yes?
Yes, jikta.
Okay, so they're saying, so Lama Chango, you're saying the root is the jikta, and then they see that the self is the object observed by the jikta. So let's look at that. Okay, we're gonna look at that. And another paper that I was reading, which is a teaching by Geshe Wangcheng Lingren Pashe's teaching, he was saying that the jiktas actually arises based on the grasping at the self, and here we're saying at the self. So first, let's clarify: is it arise based on the grasping, or is it arise based on just the self? So let's get there, and then I have a few other questions about that.
That under the Karasogore. Then the Rogan, the water baki 6 and Rogan, and this is the Ninja Digi and a Karasore, Numola, Juno Sobaka Punk on a Rogan, and Kovetsawa Kade, Jason Rogan, and Kovetsawa de any Karsor, that Pungal Zimbe, Jita the rest Rogan, any Jita di any Kasata Tatus Mosesha, the Morangi Tua di Dito Sugar Regan, Situ Kalia. 다 단다 대송 받대다 양 모랑게 베제 기시 완전 누기 지 송저시 로이서와 직다 생엔디 케디 다 가르소고래 케 짐발레 키그레서 저러바게 직다 세체다 어디 가네 키고 그래서 직다 세디 가서게 다 짐발레 직다 키고 그래다 거기 죽으면 직다 세데다 당지 세데로와게 직발레 카가레 거기에서 가르서 저러바게
디다 당지 선에다 정신 저와 진지 초 강가 지야 강가 당지라 그러와 다 직다 세야데 롱유 ngal 맹네 에네 롱 생트반지 될 직다 세뭐 현다 学现在是吉他生活嘛是吧？
so.
但俺都做俺是吉他是地里块是的，我地些我的，好像做地块是吧？
Ale.
我吉他的，
Zim de ma chue shambal zim zim.
学什么的吉他了嘛？当时的是吧？但让一这边这个刚刚当时的我的吉他嘛，吉他是说俺没过过。
Hal ta khore sawa di jigta de res ke chue thamje zim be ta ka ra chin de zim ba di mares ko.
哦，对，学他现在没把他嘛的，说容易的，容易碰不了没那这个，俺了没那这个，
No.
我的习惯。
No, so. So the how it's translated. The Tibetan term is called jigta, and just to be simple, I usually say the transitory view or the view of transitory collection, right? Not my translation, but Jeffrey's and all that. But here they talk about the view reifying perishing aggregates or something like. Oh man, that seems like okay, whatever that is. So anyway, we're talking about the jigta, the transitory view. Transitory view is the form of grasping at one's own self, the self that's associated with one's aggregates, right, psychosomatic aggregates. We can also talk about grasping at the intrinsic existence of all phenomena, right? Those are two different things, right? This one is the jigta is related to one's own personal self, I.
Yeah.
Okay? Whereas the grasping at intrinsic reality could be other phenomena as well. Okay? So the root of the samsara here, right, according to this, the root of the samsara is this jigta, the grasping at one's own self.
Okay, but
That's associated with aggregates. Yeah.
yeah, well, this is where we're gonna like get a little more precise here. My understanding from the other paper that I was reading is that the jigta is a view. It's not a grasping. It is a view. So, and it is the klesha, and it is the one that that is disturbed, and it's. But while the grasping itself is not a view, it's not even an attitude. It's not even a klesha. It is not even a mental factor.
Okay.
So can we
Okay.
let's get that first?
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
there.
Morang this siguro kita kaya sore. Tana morang kita di kicho wanje nubi di jig law in sarwa kaya. Jigta ta karso orang anzo ina zimba ki keba chikir sarwa. Jigta sewa di ane ko tawe kungto re sarwa kaya. Sarwa. Ane karso kore ane ko nyomo ching tawa chag re sarwa kaya. Zimba ina inji da karso nyomo chag mare singa ba sarwa. Zimba segendi simju mare sinde kita desi chungko sarwa. Kota di se se sinaro nasa jigta segendi tawa re zimba mare sarwa kaya. And zimba ina ane da nyomo ching zimba bita chaba yo marwa kaya. O di kita se se sinaro nasa.
자, 직다디 거 따와세나? 다다 직다 세다 따와세다 유일 중에 그런데 지금 저 샤르마 차도 샤고로
Nare.
따와세다.
No.
어디래? 다다 직다디 거랑 로딩 동대 말에 되잖아. 그런 게 제바시 유일 제바샤는 거 직다 샤고로 와.
No, so.
어디 저 짐바세는 야 짐바세도 로간간 짐바지래다.
Jigta ko zimba chagor chago marso da.
아, 직다 그런 짐바샤그래.
Naro ba.
짐바샤그래.
No, so.
어때 다른 직다디야 세예지 그는 리사다다 무슨 직다 세나 그래서 다 다시에 버서 되도와 직조 따와서 직배 초서는 풍부가 버들 아니 가르사 풍부가 버 강한 직바라 메다 바라
Nare.
제가 풍부가 초스음들 딱be 나텔 맹니 이니고 다르와 직배 초 따와서 치료버스는 풍부 로어 샤고라 제가 너도디 풍부 로어 메바 풍부 간 버도 파요 마리스테던 직조 따와서 직배 초서는 메다 바라 하래다
Naro.
직배 초서 풍부가 강가 메다 바라와
Nare.
제가 거기서 가서 초서는
No.
인 직배 소리가 말해
Nare.
소리가
Nare.
어다 들을 딱be 나텔 맹이 와서 어디서 직다 세야 돼
No, so. Chede tanda kin jigta de zimba de sumro.
아 짐바래
Ta zimba de la kande samta.
짐바도 로이는 다 피진 짐바 미차선 디레 진선은 거 유일 반주야 저와
Alen zimba de. No. Okay, I think maybe that's I need to check maybe in the English translation how we do it. The jigta transitory view. He said of course it's related to the jig means transitory, referring to the collection of physical and mental aggregates, right? Our aggregates, the sagandhas, are transitory in the sense impermanent, right? They are perishable in that sense. And the self that is related to that self, that perishing aggregates, right? We see that self existing is called jigta. So this view is also in the Tibetan word called zimba, which I usually translate as grasping. But the Tibetan view zimba, Geshe says it is a zimba. Then I checked with him, what do you mean by zimba, right? The zimba also can be translated as apprehension, right? Something that apprehends, right? Apprehending. So he said that view is an apprehension, so not necessarily grasping, I think, right? So we cannot, 단다게 디 zimba say 디 유 zimba 사기 zimba 마도 안가도 남주디 여러분께 다도 zimba say zimba 될 거 말로 직다디 다도 zimba
뭐 녹히는 지야 직발 가지 유직 증거로 갖고 나 zimba 그런 유디야 말뭐 그런 데는 좀 증거로 와. 직발 본반 zimba 직발. 또 본반 지나 다도 지나 지나 직발 저거로. 직발.
Yeah. So the Tibetan word zimba can be translated as apprehension, how different perceptions apprehend their different respective objects.
And that would make it a mental factor.
Huh?
That would explain why we can say it's a mental factor because it's apprehending something.
zimba 다도 십자시에 있나? zimba에도 심도 심중이 없다. 저 심중 코드 심중을 유행하여 차려와. 어디 그거가 zimba래. 다디는 셈이요. 심중이요. 다음에다와. 다 소화도 건지 셈도 희바 인식이 zimba 샤거다. 다 희바 될래야 셈도 심중이 샤거와. zimba에 뭐 직발 심중이 난다. 소심이 난다. zimba에 뭐 직발와.
The Tibetan word, technical term zimba, which simply translates apprehension. It means apprehension in the sense of not the anxiety apprehension in the sense of apprehending objects, okay, that way. Yeah. That's a very broad term. It could include both primary state of mind, also the mental factors as well. Okay. So that's what Geshe wants to clarify it.
I interrupted you and you didn't.
No, that's all right. Yeah. No, go ahead.
zimbal에 유신지로 지모로 인가 용거로 왔다. 그래와 독자진게 야간게 다들 각각 위를 중에 각각 들봤어요.
So actually we can say in a broad sense that every state of mind, whether primary or secondary or mental factor, we can consider it as a zimba apprehension because it is apprehending something. Now the question is whether it's apprehending correctly or incorrectly, right? So there's the incorrect zimba apprehensions, and then there are the correct apprehensions. So we can talk like that.
Okay, good. Now back to our what we were distinguishing with the jikta from the grasping.
Right.
So now we're now just established that the jikta apprehends. So it is a mental factor, and now let's go back to the grasping.
Yes.
So let's make sure with Geshe that the grasping is neither a mental factor, and basically it just holds something. So is it like an action? It's like holding something. So what is going on with the grasping? And how come we're saying that it's not like a disturbed emotion or so?
다디 여러분께 단다 안주다 다즈베 당진세 여러분께 당 짐바디 당진세 짐바디 여러분께 안 짐바디 에네 가르서 그래다 모랑기다 대비상 받을 오다 제베는 심중 말에서 라비서 여러분께 zimbacho ta zimbacho wa ge chata ane ko simchu man ve na ta nga ngo bo ina kar re su do ge demin du che ro wa ge su she kha me demin du che re su re she ba ro wa ge ta kan de chlo ji sam stang ko re so ge din de zimba di ki ko khare yin be yin ne di ki ta ba na kar so di la che ne ta nyomon da ma re ki go ji go ro wa ge odi chele ro ja man ko chele ro ji sha go re simchung da din sem kha ya ma re kar re so
zimba da zimba 세
다 zimba 당진이 라
다 zimba 세 셈도 심중 인가 요래 셈 이지를 군도가 요비 차로 심중 다 고노를 셈어 요래 심중 인가 요래 그래봐
어디 차고요 말고 zimba 세 나라 다
zimba 세인데 거기 유인 증기를 강가 샤고라 제가 찍을 샤고 말아 다 단다 마르 바세는 심중으로 와 당지스는 심중
당지 말이 봤어야지
당지 말해봐 세나 페이지 심중샤고지 당지다 당지 말해봐 때 가가야 돼 말해봐 심중으로 와 당지는 소스면 열어 중대 강가 당지를 들어 소안디시 강가 당지를 와 어디래
거기 냠도 더 저기 당한저 당다 당지 세디 가라 셈 찍고 만 조셈 단디 코드 주고 근데 강가 찍을 당지
그거 너도 지금
to make sure, right? So when we say ignorance, right, the ignorance is considered as a mental factor, simchung, okay? But then when we talk about grasping at self as the that is not just a mental factor. Actually, the way in English it sounds like, right, there's only one state of mind, grasping, right? But it is actually the way Geshe explained, it's a combination of, it includes primary mind, it includes secondary mental factors that go with the primary mind. So it's not like a one single grasping, but it involves both primary mind and also mental factors that go with the primary mind. So that's what we call grasping itself. So it is a collection of things, isn't it? Right? I double check with it. It's a collection of those host of, I should say, not collection, host of primary and secondary minds, right?
So we're saying that we're putting it in the category mind then, because we're the kind of phenomena that we're categorizing it as. We're saying that it is a mind, the grasping, or is it an action that we're holding? So what's going
on? Ana karsa di nyamdo da semjun de de zan rawa ge da diga sama sem gi khungto zhe xiao wo rawa ge la sem gi khungto zhe xiao wo chele de ma rawa
xie zhe da sem se ne de de bu hibar zhe wo da ji ming xin de hibar da
no so
da sem yin ne da sem ju ne ga ga hibar ma ji gwa rawa
na de
da sem se ne ya zuo zun go ya sem jing zhe ya sem yin sem
right and this goes back to the technical, how do we translate the Tibetan word sem? Generally we translate as mind, right? But then sometimes it's translated as awareness. So all of that constitutes awareness, he said. Yeah. It's not activity. It is awareness, which includes both primary and mental factors, a host of things. Yeah. No.
Okay, then now we can put things together. Now that we have one of the. Right. So we have the jikta, which is rising on the basis of the awareness. Of which is a self-grasping. So jikta is arising on the basis of a self-grasping. The self-grasping has to arise on, it has to see a self, and in this case would be an intrinsic self. So let's get this part.
And Tangzin di kawaran ki gosa ko taal ten ki gor so dus samdan di gor so da
ten di kese da musician ki gor
wa Tangzin di musician ki Tangzin di jigda den
Dangzin se te se ra ka ji rang yi zhe de ganga dangzin se lai ma jigda se de rong ju ngal me go lai ma jigda se rong ju so so phong bol me mi khen da be ju tha de khang sa men da zhe ba de la ya jigda la ma ro
ala rang shin zhe zimba de la yin ji mi jigda ki go ma ro da
rang yi zhe zimba de jigda mi cha ma jigda la rang yi zhe ba zhe pa cha ro wa
di pa cha Geshe, what he's saying is that the jigda transitory view is a very particular kind of a view that only relates to the personal self associated with, right? And then there is the grasping at the intrinsic reality of all phenomena. That's a separate one. Okay, so we could say that the transitory view jigda can be included within grasping at intrinsic reality, but grasping at intrinsic reality does not necessarily become jigda. It does not, right? Okay. Right. So he's not saying that the grasping itself gives rise to jigta. That's not what it is. Okay.
Yeah, we're not doing a cause and effect thing.
Okay.
Yeah. But on the basis of, so we can say that the jikta is arising, it sees, basically, it's viewing the grasping of a self of a person, our own person, not other people.
Right.
So it's that's what it's doing. It sees that, and it goes crazy and does all kinds of. But then the grasping of the self of a person is going to arise on the basis of the appearance of intrinsic aggregates.
Okay.
So now we just added that third step. You see, we're going.
The morang di chen de do again. Jikta se de kan la ngan ta sa jo mar ba ge. Mi ge ta sa jo mar ba. Ta sa jo ta. Ba ka ni yu la ta sa jo ba. Di de ko de do wa.
Cha bo xia si go la. Sa bo sa.
Mar ta. Ta sa jo again.
Ta de.
Oh, cha me cha jikta se gen de ko ta gen ji ta wa ji sha ro wa ge. Ta ngan zo Tangzin se de ro wa. Yang jikta lo los ko ta gen de la zin de gen ji samtang ge so ro wa ge. Di le sum ge so wa.
Di nga de no ya da. De jigda la mar sim sim be cha go do wa. Dangzin sim sim be cha ma. Dang ga de no.
Kan des ge.
Jigda na sim sim be cha bo. Sim sim mar be cha ro wa.
Ale long so.
Ta dangzin de jigda ji de kha ga yo de. Ta jigda nyam do so sim jo ro. De dangzin de jigda re go ma ro wa. Ta ge no zhe xia ya jigda lo zo sim xiao zhe xie de wa. the jigta say the simjung mare mo ba jigo sha do
no so
jigta ko the simjung she
no so
dang jin de la ta simjung she mo su tu de simjung so an de ge zo sim gang ga yo wa jigta la ta simjung she do
jigta simjung chapsta dangje la ina so sem da ko ko ni mo re so ta gen di yawa che ko da so the jigta sengen di ko ta de gen jil sha ro wa ta mi me da ta gen jil wa rangi phung ka rangi de ro da gen jigzo ge en phung bol ta wa de la jigta she ro ge 다 디 당진 세디 따야기 다들 진댕이 저 고고로 갈 수.
당진 세도 장나 다 되셔고 명매다와 당진 세도 장나 딘데 지 현유들 가제 다들 봐. 어tin 진짜 당진 세고. 직다도 코니 죽세 위직 바래다. 그 위카가 요 말에. 알레. 직다 당진 현유들 다 되어 봐. 다 당진 뒤에 현유들 진거 봐. 나래. 위직인데 다 직다다 당진인가 위직까지 rangi to kharo shakra yujik pare no so ta ko ta jigdal da simjung mar nimo je simjung be chago do wa dangzin de sim tozmi yor wa soa ya de ji gam jamin da yer cheta ta ala ni ga shin yu de chik pare da kan shi do ta sa chik pare jigde ta ya sa da dangzin ta sa de ko inga ta de ta sa de yujik ta de no so Geshe he need to correct himself something which he said earlier. Actually, the jigta transitive view has to be necessarily a mental factor, okay, simjung, okay. But grasping itself, dangjin, it include both primary and secondary things. Okay, he want to clarify that. That's what he missed it. Now, I think the thing is that both the jigta, transitive view, and grasping itself, they are focused on the same intrinsic self. That self is the same. They're looking at the same thing. Okay? And that's what I think we are getting confused, right? It's the same self, they're looking at it. You know? So both kind of look at the self as existing intrinsically. Now, in the case of the grasping, it's not just one single mind, it has a primary mind plus other mental factors, isn't it? But the jigta itself is just one, mental factor. Yeah. So I think we're getting somewhere now. Yeah.
So let me just, because the paper I have made it look like the jigta only sees the grasping, and the grasping is the one that sees the self.
Right.
The intrinsic self. They're both are seeing the self.
That's right.
Okay, this is brilliant now.
Yeah, good.
Okay, I'm going to sit with this. I had other questions, but it doesn't matter right now because I'm a little, I got to.
알다디 야고 싶으면서 뭐랑 당비 기타 단다겐디 안저 랑신르베 다들 미 유직 받자더와 남지 미코 딘데 텐도와 직다되게 다라 미 당진되게 양 상바절 제와
니사 이제这个东西加的是这个这东西对吧
And now we both figure out right. Yeah.
I'm going to give this to Vladimir and ask him to ask the question. Sure. Vladimir, ask about the partless particles with the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me now. You are spotlighted.
I don't know about the partners.
Okay. Whatever your questions you
No,
have.
it's a follow-up to this. I don't want to belabor it, but basically it says in this same quote we're talking about, it says the object. They see the self as the object observed by the reifying view of the perishing aggregates. But aren't they different kinds of objects? For example, does the jigta, the view of the perishing aggregates, the observed object is the conventional self, and the conceived object is the intrinsically existent self. So the observed object actually exists of jigta. Maybe this is what should have been clarified in this particular statement here, and then there is no problem. The conceived doesn't exist, but the observed exists.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Quran can show that under the Java Chago years again. The day Shabas Yamara, that when Jigdal Chashabarwa, the Miu to be Tasha or Miu Tadi ko Tanya de Betadi Serwagi. In a quick 다 가로서 그 시행사 뒤 타니 되베 다 당신 루 some 신경 와게 지도 가고 유니 상을 와 그 믹스 다들 여러 와 타니 들어와 얘네 다코 믹당 들어와 당신 루도 상바데 여 말어 와서 그러게
됐어 그래 타이에 입에 다그 미국을 시작마도 그 유에 시작마다 그 미국이 타이에 입에 다 저러 그 유에 가르쳐 안에 다 저거 가지 다 시작을 미국이 타이에 입에 다 시작 그 미국에 모두 유인라고 말해
아래 미국이 이제 그 유메 I think that's where we get into that complicated nature. Probably all need to learn the logic, I think. Here. He said, yes, the conventional self of the I, which you use the word observed object, right? yeah, we could say it's the Migyu Tibetan, right? And it sees that conventional I of the self to exist intrinsically, which is the what we call referent object, right? It doesn't exist that way. But in this case, the Tibetan version is the observed object, right, does not necessarily is counted as the object of this transitory view, right? It's not considered as the object of the transitory view of the jigta. See that difference, yeah. Yeah.
Then what is it an object of?
Okay. What?
Observation. What observes that?
Okay.
What observes the observed object?
Okay.
If there is a conceived object, there has to be an observed object or engaged object, right? So what is the observed object of the view of transitory collection? Then?
Geshe can Migyu ane kaso tanya de betadi ane tanda jigde yul tsiki mebi inar wage and jigde yu ki ko tanda shinyu jor wage shinyu de nyamdo la ya ane ya yu shamba ju yogo ko wasra wa ko mixa jor wa ane khande che ore soda
시 다가 지금 그 타이가 나들 믹 다 나도 도배 따서 마음에 세 유그라고 투모 마음에 저 도도 난 거로 와 해유대 시작으로
no
그 해유선 때리스
ene ta kore yu la kin diso ta kwana disam
그래 유를 다 나위서 지다 해유사 니 시작으로 와
dale
다 나위서 다 그런데 나 저바 나한테 다 동시도 열어 와 또 시작으로 와
ale no
나한테 동시도 시작
ale na wan dile tene peje shinyu de shagro
그 나위도 가리게 아서 나도 저바티 가제 나도 동시도 시작으로 와
dale
다그 해유대 가리샤에서 나 그런 시작을 뭐냐 동시도 시작 말어 와
hola de ranju de beta usha
대랑 유튜브에 다 하세요.
okay, yeah, okay. In the case of jigta, transitory view, the focus object of the Migyu is the conventional self. Okay, but we don't regard that as its object, right? It is there. It is based upon the conventional self. It sees the self to exist intrinsically. Yes, there is what we call appearing object, nangyu, right? The appearing object exists, which is the intrinsic appearance of the self, right? Intrinsic, huh? What? No, intrinsic appearance, sorry. Yeah, appearance of intrinsic reality, that exists. That's called appearing object, right? Now, on the base of that, right, then we have the referent object, the intrinsic self, which does not exist at all, right? So there is the appearing object. Appearing object is like what we call the conceptual image, right? That self exists intrinsically. That's how it appears, and that exists. That's existent. But the referent object, does the self exist intrinsically? Is there an intrinsic self? No, right? So that isn't there. That's what we call refuting that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure.
This example of actually the technique of how to get a sense of what the intrinsically existing self will appear in our own experience. This Gyeltsen Kappa, I doubt that he even mentioned that. I don't think that he presents this particular technique. Imagine that we're in a situation where we're unjustly accused of.
Oh, yeah, that was Geshe's explanation. I don't think it's in the text.
Okay, but not only Geshe, but I remember Phuntsok,
Right.
Gyeltsen,
Right.
everybody.
Right. Right.
And yet it's not.
Oh, I see. Okay, where is that? Okay, where is that? Yes.
The reason I'm concerned about that is because it implies that it's possible to discern the conventionally existing self, whereas it was said earlier, the way you translate it is that it's very, very difficult. So is it very, very difficult to distinguish between the intrinsic self
and yes, conventional self?
Or is it impossible?
Very difficult, not impossible. It's very, very difficult, right? Until you realize emptiness, it's very difficult. Yeah. Yeah, difficult. Yeah. The Quran this one. Anyway, I'll check with him. What you just said, it was interesting. Quran this one. That again, Geshe kyundu kan lo wagen. Penata ngaranzo. Rashin rupe ta nang dang jo wagen. Jike penata jik so le tera tang mo da mera tang mo da wagen. Kibu shibu chum toku shibu dinde kan la ya. Ane same ge sur chini ya ko tana ta te sona yung sung bo wagen. 어디 숨어야지 다 망고 숨고 들어와게 얘네 디 제일 뭐지 콩으로 버지 디엘라 딘데 숨으면도 콩으로 그 여러 배서 거다 단다 니네 샤세 저러와게 근데 기도 가블이야 디 다기 다 가서 손나도 숙심 사 다 대세 준 거로 와 아마 망고 숨고 들어서 되네로 와 얘네 제일 뭐지 단다 슝디나 딘데 게 숨는도
아니 제일 뭐지 다베 때도 시다가 어디래 가장 해셔야 돼가 하자 되어 디 제일 뭐 숨는 비기 단다 나를 충분히 매게 인간 나를 친구도 찾아로 봐 좀. 팀이 현장의 비지 민도
그렇죠.
디다 단다 람리 쳔바나리 요래 다 라메 송도 멍보나리 요래
그렇죠. 알아 이제 제르무지게 단다 순한 경고야 말고.
내가 통마송
그렇죠.
통마디 뭐 신당저부터 제가 다디 소대 하고 그래서 배 가슴 대부카디서야지 야 감자로는 가슴야지 수수 딱지 셔다 이 흉실도 다 줘라
알아.
근데 흉치보디 근데가 무슨 라야
알아 람린 샴바 되는 세기 여러.
요래
그렇죠.
로정도 뭐 요래 요래
Geshe says, yeah, I mean, he doesn't recall that Jerembuche has said that something in this text or some other versions of the Lamrim, right? But some other Lamrims by other masters, right, they have said that. Or in the mind training text, Lojong, right, they mention of things like when we are very excited or things like that, it's a good occasion or a situation for us to kind of look at, right, our intrinsic sense of self. But you're right, in Jerembuche, it does not, right, say in the text. Yeah.
So it is possible.
Yeah, it is possible, right? 다 가서 어디 타녀도 옆에 다다 아니 다다 랑신도 옆에 다 아니 대다 안저를 쉬우지 되대요 와게 이제 예와 체디 지단 체 두고요 안저를 다 가고 차는
또 또 사도 치고 다 라브리 세문난도가 최제다 시인인데 따와 맞아 봐도 소소 제 미시스 이 라브리 세문 단다 다가랑 요 다디
Yeah, he says in this Lamrim, Jeremiah says that very clearly that until we realize emptiness, right, we find it very difficult to separate the conventional self and the intrinsic self. But once you realize emptiness, you can separate them too.
And are we talking about the direct realization or the
알아, 돈이 또 와서 돼, 돈주스도 또 와서고, 무슨도 또 와서고, 가서 돈이 또.
무슨도 무슨 또 와서 파음도 그러.
나를 돈주스.
또 돈주스 돈이 컸다 말한 지금.
That's right. The what called the intellectual realization, understanding of emptiness, not the necessarily the direct or the naked realization of emptiness. Right. Yeah.
A general comment, and if this is meant to be a practical guide, more practical, oriented, and yet he doesn't give an example of this particular technique. Isn't that peculiar?
I say, yeah.
So I was wondering if this is kind of a later development, later idea.
Okay, sure. Tanda geng di sumbar wa tagi pena lamrim dina cha sha bina ane ji tawa ina tenju bi sha so so mo da tu da dam je wa chi ge marwa ko kan san nyamleng ro ji shi go wa ge ta pe ta nge da ma da ga di si du kal de nyamleng lo ina ge ta da geng su na de nga cha go do wa so wa ge ta pe na nga zo so so ya ta na wa cha da de ka du ka shi sa jo wa ge sa dan je ro mo che ge di de ma so ya di 냥가로 가와투 인스고 와게 뭐 숨고야를 시도스로와 에나 다다 괜찮은 숨어대야디 에나 제르무 제 슈올이야 로와 케바 샴바고 숨 딘데 윤고라 가리나스 골다디
피진다 당보 맹아 지당도 제르무 지다 제르무 지들 자매한게 야 년지 맹아 사야들 요요로와 어 디레 기위인데 하모공야 데 기위스 히야메 가제 라마다 간도 샤이사 라마 망보 숨봉자 랍자도나 요래 또 진짜 내라 요레스
어서나 다이네 제르무 제 마소 뭐 냥가로 가르차나 소 동원에 지 삼다다 계획을 차대요 와게
아레
당진을 전달
냥가도 다 제르무 지대로 가르사 단다 제가 지금 근데 인조를 봐도 십자도 십시되나요? 그래서 흉모에 직세하죠 말에. 그래와 단다디 지고서 뭐다 가사 갈래 십자도 배 농원되는 뭐부터 그래와. 십자 찍으면 돼 그래와. 어 니들 강가를 십자 동 거는 흉모부터 그래와. 근데 페이지 된대 인도.
Geshe said that I mean he's not sure I mean, the things he shared, and as you also acknowledge, other lamas say the same thing, whether that has something connection to how maybe the teaching passed down from, like, say, when he heard from the Manjushri and so on, right? He's not sure whether that's part of that oral transmission lineage. He's not sure. But with regard to your sort of comment about why this seems to be so important, Jeremiah did not really, right, bother to give such examples. He's not really sure about it, but sometimes what many times Jeremiah says, if you have to write everything, it becomes so voluminous, right? Too much wordy. So he's afraid of that. I don't know whether that's part of his reason why he didn't say that, but not sure. Yeah.
Nevertheless, he spends hundreds of pages on the subject of identifying the objects of negation.
Right.
And he doesn't give this example, which will take just one paragraph.
Right.
So maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So he doesn't know why.
Anyway.
Maybe down the line we might figure out. Yeah.
Generally, the way we heard the presentation of the tenets is only the Vaibhashikas assert a partless particle. The schools after that, they reject that. But here we've been saying that they accept partless particles. Now, I know that the Sautrantika accepts external reality. But my understanding was that they reject the partless particle, right, Vladimir?
Say it again. Generally, you said.
Generally, the way I've heard teachings, and it could be I've completely mistaken, so
Right,
I'll put this on myself,
Right.
is that the Vaibhashikas assert that the existence of a partless particle.
Yes.
The Sautrantikas, my understanding is they say, no, there's an external reality, but it's not partless. And then, of course, the Sautrantika come in.
Right,
They
right,
also accept external reality.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding is everybody above Vaibhashika does not accept an external, a partless particle.
Okay.
And here we've been kind of using it interchangeably with external reality. Can we check
Okay, sure. 여기 그냥 참여해서 저러게. 디 독주 수조 제사 제가 뭐라는 말도 뭐 권호되면서 손 배나 단다 치다 마봐요, 저러게. 치다 마봐기 아니 참여 누구를 저러게. 아니 단다 디로 도대베기 저러게. 아니 치료 가서 된들로 뭐 참여 계시기 말해서 저러게. 아니 내내 다 치다 마바네 야스고로 다 야스도 좀 공마 되게 아니 참여 누구요 말해서 될 것이다. 디단다 양직 세세시나로 나서 저러게. 참여세 디다 시든 룹사니 직보차고래 돈다카가래 가르스고로 와게.
매가 직바 말해. 시동다 대요가 되고 와.
나래.
디 지라바다 너드바니 케야 말 샤베 내가 직바래.
나서.
직보지경래.
나서.
다 엄마 런지브나 너데 집 엄마 런지브사 링리지기다 에데 차민데서 라브리시모나 차민데서 여러와.
나서.
뉴신디 체와 타르도바야 데베 뉴샤미 헤도스 여러와.
나서.
다들 이잡 마샤 데케는 거지. 다 군지 자서 뉴샤미 케는 말 세도 뭐. 너리서 그런 요. 다 피진 건서 다 서이는 마 용거래.
나서.
어때? 데 지도 시동도 다 차민도 다 가가리다.
나서.
시동도 댕기로 간다고 와.
나래.
자 지도스도 지도 비 시로 유디 아니 시베 미겐도야 될 시동도에서 왔다.
알아요. 다 단다디 제가 지라마 가서 얘기 단다디 가서다 제도니기 치든 되도가라 치든 줍다데 참에기 안에 가서 듀를 줍네 치든 줍고 스타디
어디 참에서 저거 먼저 속 락바지 다 락바도 간가 땅요 인식으로 땅요 땅도제 젠 이고 땅도 도시 거기 가지 타타 뉴샤모 토고 다 레레와 가 뉴샤모 사샤지 뉴사니 톱딩이로 와 다디 뉴데 타마들 차치니 메바 콜바 초샤 이제 샤도 높지야 베베 하정 슝슝샤가 말해. 어들 니참이 쇼 참이에서 거. 다 링데 지게 양 참이 때 탐에 마음이 참이스기도 와. 다 마히지 바리. 시시시시시시시 육다 거 시야 메브레니. 디네 마 시는 거 메브샤로 바 영조 시야 맹게다 가래. 탐에 메비 탐에 마음이 참이에서 거.
Geshe said that both Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, assert partless particles. Yes, external objects or external existent objects and partless particles are not synonyms, not one the same thing. Because Prasangika Madhyamikans also accept external existent objects. Okay, but in the case of Sautrantikas, they said that there are external objects which are constituted by partless particles. So what does partless mean is that if we dissect particles of an object, finally, at the end of the ultimate analysis, we will find one particle that cannot be divided any more further, right? And that is the partless particle, right? According to their school of thought. Okay, we'll stop there today. Yeah, thank you. I think they have a meeting. I think I was giving cues from somewhere. 강계로드 딘예 딘데 인다 남다 럽세베 진예 등근 지시 니제 도가 레밤제 강다 세베 저라 민도 동에 예세베 도조 권라 보제 연라 조제 양된 손조다 체조 녀몬 레예 자조 저제 마레 메세 동에 뇨고 진예 전제 라데나 되네 인데알은도 예세 도고 주다 주니 예데 달메제 잠베 양라 제 오마라바잔나 Di zenden choje kenra weze yen dalwe tiemo mimba rapse ne kada tenje shuru to na wan zendo zo lode gyazu uchun bega de kesan kongwe chudo mimba shin tenba zingla wangdo jisho be danyen shogun so wan de page 21. Obeisance to my guru and protector Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of seeing all things as they are, whose intelligence shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of Father for his only Son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusion and free us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance, you who have been pure from the beginning, who have completed the stages achieving the highest perfection of a bodhisattva, whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha, I bow down to you, Manjushri, Om Arabhazana De. O compassionate one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the text that page 31. Like the sweet perfume of white lotus, born in the ocean of knowledge, nourishing honeybees, the fortunate being, your fame pervades all directions. You are proficient and powerful in upholding the precious doctrine. To you, O Lord Santenzing Wangda, respectfully I pray. Chanjo senjo rinpoche ma ye ba na ye jo che ye wa nyam ba me ba yang gong ne gong pe wa jo dong ni da wa rinpoche ma ye ba na ye jo ye wa nyam ba me ba yang gong ne gong pe sa ji be ji ju ji men lo zha ri ra ling ji nin de yan ba sang jie jin do mi de wi wa yin zhou gun che bai jo kan ri ra ve go ve xin kan de ben dan de wa ma le jong ve ne che re se wan tin zin ya zo ye sha ve si de 天主之一道